Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Circles Live. Don't worry, you've not just got me, because here, by the wonders of technology, we have my wife Leanne.
Hello
Leanne.
everybody. Hello. This is a bit of a different setup. Where are you? I'm sitting here by myself.
I know. I'm in London, you're in Newark, but we are together online.
We are together in hearts.
Absolutely. 100%. But it's good to be back live with the people. We can see lots of people giving waves and high fives in the chat column. Make sure that you are interacting with us this evening, because we've got a question, haven't we, Leanne, to kind of get people talking. Although at the moment I've not seen any answers to the question, so we've either got a stingy bunch on tonight, or
I can see some answers. There's one or
can
two.
you?
Yeah, I can see one or two.
I'm obviously missing them.
Yeah, the question, in case you haven't seen it already, is what's the biggest gift you've ever given? And I don't mean in size, because that would be easy. I mean in terms of, something that really cost you a lot. Maybe it's something you had to save up for, or maybe something you always wanted to give somebody and it just took a long time to give. Like, it could have been a gesture, whatever. What's the biggest gift that you've given? And obviously, maybe I'm thinking about this because we're going to be coming up to Christmas shortly, and I'm thinking about gifts and what we're giving. And so we want you to answer that question. I see, I think Sue had put something about my mum. Bought my mum a Hoover one year. Do you know what? That would be a fantastic gift for me. Anyone want to buy me a Hoover? I love Hoovers.
Now this is interesting, because I'm torn, and I think Leanne does this to me. When I ask her what she wants for Christmas, which I have done already, because Christmas starts in our household in March. And so I've asked Leanne, what do you want for Christmas? And one of the things that she's said is she wants I think it's a spot steam cleaner.
I mean,
and
you're almost there, yeah.
I'm almost there, am I? Yeah.
Not a spot steam cleaner, but like
yeah,
spots on your face.
Get rid of all those spots that she's got.
Easy.
No,
Don't be saying things just because you're not in the same room as me.
Exactly. I think it's a spot cleaner to sort out woody messes. That's our dog. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Now, she said this is what I want, but you see, you can't buy your wife a cleaning product for Christmas. So is she testing me? This is what I want to know. Tell me, people, do you think, let's have this as a bit of an interaction as well, so we can throw this in there. Plenty of interaction this evening. Do you think it's okay for a husband to buy a wife a cleaning product, if that's what she's requested? Because I think she's testing me. I think if I buy it, I'm going to get, why are you buying me cleaning products? Do you say that I don't clean enough? Or actually, does she mean it? Does she really want it?
I'm just going to leave you thinking about that for a while. I do mean it. I would like that. I mean, I'd like other things.
Well, I know that you do
too,
like it because you love cleaning, but I'm torn. I'm not quite sure if I should do it. But we'll see what the people say, and maybe they will give me some wisdom. But what answers have we got here? Let's have some up.
Here we've got one: giving time up to ensure someone completed deadline for a course. Big because of the joy and the appreciation she expressed when she did well and got through. That's really good. Giving up time. Actually, time is a huge gift for some people, especially when you've got a busy schedule, busy life. To give up your time for someone is huge. So that's a great gift you can give somebody.
That is a great gift. Michael, my wife, has had
this.
a lot of big gifts over the years. He's emphasizing that. And I brought her a new MacBook recently, but she was not
as impressed as I would have been.
Oh, you see, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. When you don't quite get the reaction. Yeah, that's a bit of an orcs moment, isn't it? An orcs moment.
It's true. Oh, my daughter, she bought me trainers. That was a big gift, actually. She surprised me. I was just looking online and said, "Oh, I like these." And next thing she goes, "I've ordered them for you." That was a lovely gift. Well done, Erin.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Ian bought me an ironing board for Christmas one year.
Oh dear. Now, can I just say, I like cleaning gifts, but if you buy me an ironing board, I will batter you with it.
Word. Seriously. Violence, people. Violence this evening. Yeah. recently bought Chloe an air fryer for her new house. Air fryers, they've been all the rage.
Yeah, love an
They've
air
been
fryer.
taken
I
off,
have got
haven't
a
they?
very mini one, but a big one. I'd really like a big air fryer, so that's a nice gift.
Is that another hint?
Maybe.
I'm being told here by Sue to buy. Where is it?
Oh, I like that. Buy
buy
it, but
her
hide
it,
a
but
diamond
hide
ring
the
in the
diamond.
dirt bag. Oh, Sue, you old romantic, you. I mean, he has already bought, and so there we go.
Yeah,
We'll let
absolutely.
him off that.
Yeah. I'm going to reject that wisdom, Sue.
But I've got like 9 other fingers that you could fill with diamonds. So keep going.
Mark Captanino says practical gifts not allowed. That's that Mark there speaks a man of wisdom. I'm going to listen to Mark. No practical gifts. No practical gifts. I think he speaks wisely. Yeah.
Oh, that's very good. I think there's something wrong with my camera. Sorry, apologies for the delay on there. I had a funny face for a second. It's not me. It did actually freeze. Don't know. No funny comments, Gareth. You were desperate to say something then, weren't you?
I've just held back. I was going to say there's nothing wrong with my feed.
Just be careful, because we will be back together in a couple of days and I will make your life a misery.
Oh, yes.
I like that.
Yes.
Ordinarily, no, but for Leanne, yes. Yes, absolutely.
There we go. Well, we are asking this for a reason this evening. This is not just kind of a way of wasting away time. This is linked, isn't it, Leanne?
It is, because we want to talk about obviously giving gifts, but obviously we're talking about bringing gifts to God. And when I was kind of preparing this, again, thinking about Christmas that's coming up in just a few weeks, and the fact that, we see in the nativity story how gifts were brought to Jesus, the gold, the frankincense, the myrrh, different things were brought to Jesus. And really, they were symbols of worship, of his authority. They were symbols of the fact that this was the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Messiah that had been promised. But, there was something very key in that very first kind of scene that we see as in kids' plays right up until now, that they were the first gifts brought to our Lord and Saviour, Jesus. But how that theme is so important throughout the whole of the New Testament, and now in our lives as we continue, in the form of worship. And we want to talk about how important worship is. And obviously we've been talking about, the whole of this series is going from believers to builders. Not that believers is bad, but that's kind of our starting point when we first come into that relationship with God, with Jesus. We're a believer, but then we need to become a builder of the kingdom of God. And believers, we've put here, understand worship is what we are created to do. Because that's our kind of standing point. That's our starting point, that we are created to worship. Everybody, whether they love Jesus or not, whether they're a disciple of Jesus or not, has this innate desire to worship. And whether we realize it or not, we all worship something or someone at different times. That is in our kind of design, in our makeup. But obviously, when we come to Jesus, we realize what that worship is about. However, moving on from that, being a builder in the kingdom of God sees worship as foundational for a life of discipleship. It literally is the bedrock of our relationship with God. We have to have worship right at the very center. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this conversation.
And I love this because I think the whole area of worship, like you've already correctly said, it needs reframing, especially for those of us who have been followers of Christ for a long period of time, because we are so locked in, aren't we, to that understanding that worship is music, worship is singing, and of course it includes that, but it is really not doing the subject of worship justice and the concept of worship justice if we just attach it to that. And so we're going to really kind of dive into this to really understand what does that life of worship, that lifestyle of worship look like as a disciple, and also connecting that to the fact that, it's from that place that we build. Worship actually gives us the not only the right kind of state in which to build, in other words, to make the right choices each day, to contribute to people, to serve people, but it also, I believe, it unlocks gifts, spiritual gifts. I don't think
Yeah.
we can access the spiritual gifts without worship. Do you understand what I mean, Leanne, by that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Worship, in a sense, is the gateway to that. We have to
Absolutely.
come to him through worship. It's that entrance point where we come in and we can access all that God has got for us. You know, in the Psalms, David talks about enter his courts with praise, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts
Yes.
with praise. Now, obviously, in that sense, it was a physical gate, it was physical courts that they would have to go through to the temple to worship, etc. And there's various different scenarios of that in the Old Testament. But of course, with Jesus, he tore that curtain from top to bottom. That, in other words, the way is made clear, but now we still have an entrance point. It's in our hearts where we enter his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with praise. Worship is literally the gateway in order to receive all that God has got for us.
Brilliant stuff. And so we're going to dive into a particular part of the Bible that's going to help us understand kind of the difference here between the believer understanding worship's what we created to do, which is, like we say, with all of these kind of contrasts, which is important. It is absolutely true. It is not false. But we've got to move on from that if we are going to become a builder who truly makes an impact and helps the kingdom of God grow from strength to strength. So this is where we're going to go. We're going to go to John chapter 12.
Yep, John chapter 12, verses 1 to 8. And you may have read this story before, but, hopefully you'll get something new, a new revelation from it in this session. But John 12 says this: 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. And if you haven't read that story on how Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, an incredible account, make sure you go back a couple of chapters, make sure you read that. An incredible story. So much in there. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honour. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Right there, just before we carry on, what an incredible picture of Jesus with his friends. This isn't a church service. This isn't a meeting in the temple. This isn't a prayer meeting. They were enjoying one another's company. Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. And what I want us to get across is that, in our times with circles, when we talk about having food together, and I love hearing stories of how circles have been doing that and going out and enjoying time with one another.
Brilliant.
That is how we should be, reclining at the table with him. Okay, not literally, if you're at someone's house, don't put your feet up and lie down, all right? But what I mean is that sense of we are in the presence of our friend. Jesus is our brother. Jesus is our friend. We don't just worship him in a church service. It's when we are with our friends, when we're eating and sharing together. Anyway, sorry. So I just want you to have that kind of image in your head.
It's an important point
about worship, because otherwise we can reserve it for certain times, and we're going to try and bust that whole myth today. It says, then Mary took about 1/2 litre of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she would save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. And obviously there Jesus was talking about the fact that he was going to die, that he knew what was about to happen. And obviously we know Judas there, who was the one who pointed all that out and kind of picked fault. He was the one who had it in his heart, had in mind what he was going to do. He was going to betray Jesus in that moment. So when we see this, for me, this is like an incredible, intimate moment between Mary and Jesus in worship. And what we have to, I think, be careful with the word worship, similarly with the word church, is that we don't pigeonhole it into something that it was never intended to be. So I think sometimes we talk about church, and we've talked about this for years in Everyday Champions, and hopefully we've moved on from this point. But we can talk about church like the building or the meeting or the program, an organization, an institution, and we forget that actually the church is the ecclesia, the body of Christ. And it's the same with worship, that if we're not careful, over decades, over generations, we have pigeonholed it and reduced it to 3 songs on a church service that people have sung. Now, I don't want to be, too kind of carte blanche with this and say that's what everyone thinks, because that isn't true. Not everybody thinks that is just what worship is. But if we're not careful, we can, when we think of worship, go straight to looking at words on a screen, singing a song or a hymn in an old church building, a new church building. That is not what worship is about. And if we go right back to the beginning in Genesis, before the fall, before sin entered the world through Adam and Eve, we see how they walked and talked with God. They had that unbroken communication with God. That was worship, in the sense that they were able to talk, love him, honor him with everything before that. Now, obviously, then when the fall came, there came that separation. And so worship is something we probably have to work a little bit harder at, because we can't see him or hear him audibly like maybe Adam and Eve did. So let's just pull apart, that whole thing of worship is not something that we go to or do at a specific time. Like we said, builders believe that it is foundational for a life of discipleship. It runs through everything.
Absolutely brilliant. And after this short break, we are going to understand what worship is based upon what we have just read. So get your notepads ready. Get ready to get down the points. We're purposely not going to put the points on the screen because we want you to engage with this. Okay, so after this short break, we'll be back. And so get ready to get some points down and to have some practical next steps to move from a believer to a builder in the area of worship.
Here at Everyday Champions, we are committed to having courageous conversations, so that as you move along your discipleship journey, you become more like Jesus and have tools in your hands for the mission that he has given you. Every week, we have conversations that unpack big questions to help us along our journey. Make sure that you join us or watch the conversations that we have on this YouTube channel to help you on your journey. Let's have a little look at the conversation from this week.
Welcome to another conversation.
The quality that we're looking at in this conversation is sacrifice. Sacrifice is something we have to grapple with and understand, because it is an integral part of living by faith.
It's what he believed, not what he brought, that was the difference. It's the motivation, it's the faith that is behind the sacrifice itself that really counts.
In order to bring the more out of us, he needs to know what is really going on in our hearts.
Poor Cain, he was trying.
At least he tried.
At least he brought something.
It's the taking part that counts. And that's where that phrase, that the Bible teaches us, it's not the taking part that counts. Brilliant. So make sure you go and check that out on YouTube from Sunday's conversation. So we're going to get back into it, aren't we, Leanne? The whole area of moving from a believer to a builder in the area of worship. Let's just remind ourselves what that shift is. We'll go up onto the screen now. So believers understand worship is what we are created to do, but builders make the shift to understanding what it looks like to make it a foundational part of their discipleship life, to make it a lifestyle. So Leanne, let's jump into this. How do we start to do that based upon the story? And also we've got a couple of other parts of the Bible that are going to help us with this.
And just to kind of say as well that the conversation that was just shown there, this kind of fits really well with that, everything that we were talking about in that. So make sure if you haven't caught up with that or seen that, go and go and watch that, because we talked there about sacrifice and how actually this is what worship is. And the kind of big question that we want you to take into your circle later on this week is the whole thing of, is worship costing you? Does your worship to God cost you? Because it should cost you something. We've just seen there in that story with Mary, with Jesus, it cost her. You know, when I think about a year's wages, obviously depending on what your job is, depending on how much you earn, what your income is, regardless of what it is, that is a lot of money. That's a lot of value. And so in one sense, I can see myself being a little bit like Judas and going, what? Imagine what you could do with that. Imagine what mission project you could give that to. Imagine all the poor people that could be helped through that. And it's not that the poor don't need that, because Jesus actually tells us to go and help the poor. You know, and when we read the, you know, kind of our whole mandates to go and help those who need that. We should do that. But in that moment, that wasn't about, oh, what can I do with this money? What can I do with this perfume? It was an intimate moment, like I said, between Mary and Jesus, where she completely understood who was in her presence. And I think for us, we need a greater awareness, and we need to understand that worship primarily is not about us. Yes. I think very often we can think about worship is how I feel, what God's done for me. And don't get me wrong, I worship God probably more when things are going well, because it's out of an overflow of, oh, God's so good. So that's right. But equally, I should be doing that when things aren't so good, because God is God depending on what's going on in my life at any given time. So worship is not about us, it's about Jesus. And it's easy to kind of pigeonhole worship into that small box, that it's an experience that we just go to when we feel like it, or when I need a pick-me-up, you know. And I've been guilty of this. Now, I'm not saying this is wrong, because I don't know about you, probably do this, and I know you do, Gareth, because we've done it ourselves, where we go and listen to worship music in order to help us. And that's right, because there's something supernatural that happens. But if I only do that just for a pick-me-up, I'm totally misusing what worship is about. It is not about me. It is about him.
And it's interesting, because I think what's talked a lot about in churches, and we have as well, so this isn't a kind of statement against anybody, but I'm not even sure when we talk about a worship experience, should we actually, I know what we mean, but actually sometimes we can look to try and create a worship experience, but you don't create a worship experience. You worship, which creates your experience.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And,
yeah.
and
Our
so
whole
I
life
think,
should be a worship experience.
Yeah, I think a worship, when we talk about let's create a worship experience, that's kind of outside in.
Yeah.
What discipleship does is actually, we don't have an experience that we go to. We have a worship that we bring, that we create an experience out of that. And I think that's inside out versus outside in. So I think, again, it's really important. Again, this is a shift that we've made and are making. We're not fully there yet in our church life, is that we don't want to build worship experiences. We want to build disciples who cultivate a worshipful experience on a daily basis, so that when 2 or 3 come together, it happens. You don't have to create it. It actually is the overflow of discipleship.
We talk about overflow there, and I think that's what's really key. And I, like we've said, and I've caught myself saying this before, just about using singing particularly as a way of building me up. Now, I don't want anyone to feel bad about this, because we need those moments, and there is something supernatural that happens in singing worship. At the end of the day, we're going to be doing that for eternity, so we better enjoy that, and singing praises to God is a command, to use our bodies, to use instruments, whatever, to worship him, because that is right.
Just on that, you're not going to be able to tell me off for my falsetto.
No, but it will be perfect in heaven, and I might not be anywhere near you, so there we go.
When I'm singing those Take That songs, in the car and I'm doing the falsetto.
That is
I got
not
told off.
worship.
I got told off for the day. Well, yeah, that's true. Take that song's not it's not worship.
It was bad.
But I was singing falsetto voice and she was shutting me down. She was stopping me, utilizing my God-given gift. The Bee Gees would be jealous of my falsetto voice.
I tell
Anybody
you
under
what.
the age of 30 hasn't got a clue who the Bee Gees are,
No.
but you know.
Even the angels were like, "Oh, stop." No, please, no. Look at that. Whoever's in
I
charge
better
of
not
Everyday
sing it because
Champions.
I better not sing it because it's so close to the original. We'll get shut down on the YouTube channel for copyright.
No, right. Shush. That is enough. But in heaven, it will be perfect. So don't worry. What's now imperfect?
I'm
shall
ready to
become
rock
perfect.
and roll in heaven, people.
Rock and roll. Oh dear.
Honestly, it is not. It's not just a dream. Bear in mind, I had a dream last night, by the way. Just on the side.
We've gone way off the point here.
We're going to get back to worship, but I dreamt last night that I was swimming in an ocean of fizzy orange juice. I mean, I woke up and then I realised it was just a fantasy.
Okay, so moving on and coming back to...
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going back to dreams, yeah.
And you're not even in the same room, so I can't like dig you in the ribs or look at you like shut up or whatever. So I'll let you have your moment. Okay, now
Thank you.
moving on.
Back to worship.
Back to worship. But yeah, I've been guilty of that, and I don't want people to feel bad that we come into singing or at a worship time, because there is something supernatural and very special that happens in that moment. And like I said, singing is part of our worship to God. But if that's the only time, and like you used the word overflow, I used that word overflow, don't you think our experiences when we come together would be even more powerful if it was out of an overflow,
Yes.
not us all just joining in that in order to buck ourselves up? Do you know what I mean? And I think this comes from Romans 12, where actually that letter to the Romans, where Paul talks about in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Now, if you really want to know what worship is, Paul says this is your true and proper worship. And he says a lot about worship in 1 Corinthians 13, 14, around that area. He talks all about when you come together, what you should do. But he says this is our true and proper worship, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. That means every day on the altar. And that's why I said go and watch the previous conversation from EC Live where we talked about sacrifice. Because we don't need to sacrifice animals anymore to God. Our bodies should be every single day, our lives. God, I lay myself on the altar every day. My body is a living sacrifice. Whatever I do, whatever I say, whatever I think is a sacrifice of worship to you. That is what it's about. So it's never about me and how I feel and what I want and what's going on and how I need to act in this moment and what songs I prefer and all of that. It is Jesus. And I really think Mary in that moment, she shows us a perfect example. She didn't care how much it cost. She didn't care who saw her or what people thought of her. And it was out of a moment of being relaxed around the table. It was like in that moment, she just had a revelation of who Jesus is and just wanted to pour out her love. And then there's that moment, which I love, where she wipes his feet with her hair. And if you understand the significance of obviously a woman's hair, particularly in those times, not just now, that the humility in that moment of how she literally used her hair, lowered herself to worship in him and wiping his feet with her hair is quite an incredible moment.
Yeah, I've just lost your picture.
Sorry about that.
No, it's
I'm
okay.
still here.
You're still there? Okay, brilliant. But no, listen, I think, you're absolutely right. And let me just pick up on something that you just said, just while you look at your camera. But the thing that I thought when you just spoke, and let me just bring up here the second part of Romans 12, because you're absolutely right. When it comes to the whole area of offering up our bodies as a living sacrifice, it is directly linked to us being builders. It's directly linked to our day-to-day activity, because Paul goes on to say, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, the will of God is about God influencing our daily choices and our daily decisions. So get this, for us to work effectively in the kingdom, we have to do so from a place of worship. Verse 1 is this: offering our bodies as a living sacrifice, worship. And then what follows is working for God each day, outworking his will through our choices, our decisions. And so if we don't get the verse 1 right, if we don't get the lifestyle of worship, if we don't get the, there's lots of different ways. We're going to talk practically in a moment before we land this on what this looks like. But if we don't get the whole aspect of cultivating a worship experience through our lives each day, then I think it's going to affect our ability to make those choices that are going to stand out, that are going to be distinctive. We won't be able to operate in the slipstream of God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will, without that lifestyle of worship, which then takes us back to being just believers and not builders. And what this world needs right now is it needs builders. It needs believers, but not people who just stop there, but become builders. Because the society that we live in right now needs you and I to go into those environments like this woman did, the Mary, who went into this home. And again, this was not a church, this was a home. And she went into that home and she influenced that culture of that room. She challenged the culture. And that's what you do as a builder each day. When you go into that hospital, when you go into that shop, when you go into that coffee shop, when you go into that meeting, when you go into that one-to-one with a client or whatever it is, okay, you are going into a culture and your worship creates that fragrance, okay? So I just really want to say that. Are you there with us now? Yeah, let's add Leanne back in. Brilliant.
Okay,
there
I'm
you are.
having to use an alternative camera. Sorry about that. The other one just seems to have died, so I'm very sorry.
No worries. That's cool. We can see you and we can hear you. That's the main thing. So yeah, let's get back to this. So Leanne, we're going to look at kind of some of the practical ways. Like Mary shows us, doesn't she, some practical ways here?
Yeah, and I love the fact that she never wavers in her love and devotion to Jesus. I obviously didn't hear what you were saying in the last few minutes because I completely was thrown off the program. So hopefully I'm not going to repeat myself. But also through this, we can see how she, her worship was an activated response of an internal awareness of who Jesus is. And so when I talk about an activated response, it resulted in an action. We can all have an awareness, in our minds, whatever, and or a response, and we kind of go, oh yeah, that's fine. But she allowed that to become an activated response. She did something with it. That worship was practical. She didn't just think, oh yeah, Jesus is at my table and I love him and I know who he is. It spurred her on to do something. It made the kind of love that she had for him compelled her to worship him. And the whole thing of we've got to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of thinking that God is here to serve us, that actually we are here to serve him. Jesus did come as the servant king. We know that he led with servant leadership, but ultimately God is not here to serve us. We're here to serve him. And she showed that practically. And we have to think in our daily lives, actually, am I treating God like he's here to serve me, that actually he's here to bring me what I need and do what I want? Or are we living like a builder of the kingdom, which is saying, no, actually, foundationally, worship is about what can I bring him? What can I do? What can be the activated response for me, where I don't just think it, but it in turn results in something practical that I do for him in how I worship him.
Absolutely. And so, practically, I mean, let's look at this. We can get some direct practicals out of this. She was on her knees.
Yeah.
Before Jesus.
Yeah.
And that is there's a physical thing that happens.
Yeah.
When we get on our knees. And you can get on your knees in pretty much most places. Again, we're not suggesting that you do this in the middle of Morrison's or the middle of, or the middle of, the marketplace. but just a moment when then you can literally just lean into God physically. It's a physical act, isn't it, of just like of showing dependence and reverence, and just a realization that I'm in the presence of God right now. And when we do something physical, it speaks to all the other aspects of ourselves, our mind, our emotions, and it gives a platform for our spirit to lead us. So I think that very practical thing of getting on our knees is something that we can practice more than we realize.
Yeah, and when we do that out of, a realization, an internal awareness of who Jesus is, I think it pleases him. The Bible talks about how he delights in our praises, and I want God to be delighted with me and in my praises. I want him to smile when he looks at me. I think about, and I know I talk about the kids a lot, but that relationship between a parent and child can teach us a lot about how God thinks about us. And, when I think about my relationship with my children, particularly when they were a little bit younger, because as you get older, you learn how to do things. But when you're younger and when they were children, their response to me and to you as their dad was far more, what's the word I'm looking for, like raw or spontaneous. As you get older, you think about how to do things more. And I used to love it when my kids, when they were really young, would come and give me a hug or a kiss or say, I love you, not because I'd done anything, because it was an activated response of how they were feeling. They would just all of a sudden come and hug me, or all of a sudden go, Mummy, I love you, or whatever. And those moments were more precious than when they said it because I'd given them something. There'd be times when, at Christmas time or birthday, or I'd bought them sweets or whatever, they'd be like, oh, thank you, Mummy, I love you. Now, I know they did love me, but it was out of response of what I'd done for them. But when we say it, I love you, Jesus, or thank you, get on our knees before him or worship him, not because Jesus has already done everything for us by giving his life, but not because anything special has happened that particular day, but just because of who he is. I think God it delights more in that praise than when it's because he's answered a prayer or something, because then we know it's just out of who he is, not what he's done for us. And so I think it's important for us to think, how can I activate the response where it's worship, not just because of what he's done for me or things are going well, but because actually he wants to see us, in that state of worship, regardless of what's happened that day.
Yeah, it's that uninhibited kind of worship, isn't it? Like coming as little children. Yeah. And again, children don't even think half the time about where they are when they do what they do. It's like David, he said, I will become even more undignified than this. He was being told by his wife, Michal, daughter of Saul, look at you, you're humiliating yourself. You're humiliating everyone around you. But David was a man after God's own heart. David had that childlike spirit that said, I'd rather people look at me odd and cultivate a lifestyle of worship than to be worried about what people think. And again, what the world needs now is not self-conscious Christians. It needs a Christ-confident Christians. And so, again, it's some other things that we can do as well, Leanne, isn't it? Because if worship is an act of sacrifice, then our finances, are our finances aligned? Are our finances worshiping Jesus? Are we bringing worth to him through our finances? Our marriage should be a worship to God, and I think that's so key. How I serve you, Leanne, how you serve me. Yes, we're doing it for one another, but ultimately when we set our vows, it's a 3-chord strand. It's me, you, and God. And so actually that cup of tea, that cleaning up for somebody, again, these things, that they are worship. They seem like little small inconsequential details, but we should do everything as unto the Lord.
That for me is key, because again, otherwise we will just think that worship is that moment of listening to music at home, and it is that. But like you just said, your marriage, your relationship, any friendship, how I treat the people around me, how I organize my budget, how I organize my finances is worship. It doesn't sound very romantic, or, especially when you read there about Mary, how she poured out that perfume on Jesus' feet, and you think, oh, I want that moment. But for you, that might not be, pouring perfume. It might actually be sorting out my finances so that I'm not spending my money on something else, but actually putting it in the right places. It says there in those verses in John 12, which I love, it says, and the fragrance filled the whole house. And there's something that happens when we worship God with everything that we are, with our finances, with our time, in our relationships with our children, with our boss that we don't get on with very well, in our work, in every area, how we care for our belongings, all of it. When we see it as worship to God, the fragrance of that fills the house. And what I mean is that others will be impacted by your worship. It's an intimate moment between you and Jesus, not involving anyone else, but everybody else will be impacted. They will smell the fragrance of your worship in your work, in your marriage, in your home, in your friendships, with your children, in everything, in your finances. People will go, what is that? And it's worship. They will smell that fragrance of worship when we align ourselves, when we realize I've got to have a posture and a position where everything I do and everything I say is worship to God. Everything.
And then right back at the start, the Garden of Eden, that was their worship. They walked with God and they worked with God, and that was their worship for God. And if you think about, caring and cultivating a garden, in our discussions this week, let's look at what that looks like. What does looking after my garden, as it were, to use that analogy, look like? We've talked about our finances, our marriage, looking after the property that either we're renting or that we've bought. Ultimately, it all belongs to God. And what we do with all of those things, my car, is my car always a state? Let me turn my vehicle into a place where I worship God through it. Let's keep it clean. Let's keep it tidy. Let's have excellence, because that reflects God's glory. Okay, yes, things do get messy, so I'm not kind of, being harsh on this, but actually, but I want to keep creating an environment that just reflects his glory and his excellence. So why don't you this week, when you meet, look at some of the many areas that we can worship God through. And we've got a question that we want to leave them, everybody with, don't we, Leanne?
Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier. It's literally, does your worship cost you? And I think it's a really key question to ask ourselves. Yes, financially, is it costing us? But is it costing us in terms of, is it a sacrifice of praise? Is it something that perhaps you're going through a really tough time right now, and the last thing you want to do is be on your knees or, worshiping God when you don't feel like it? That's going to cost you to worship God, to thank God in the moments where it's really, really tough. But that is really the best time to do it, because then it's an authentic, doesn't matter what's going on, God, you deserve my praise. Is it a case of sitting down and going, right, you know what, I'm going to make some choices in my bank, in my finances, that actually right now that is not glorifying God. I'm going to do something about it. Is it going to cost me? In my relationships, the other person might not be returning it or be reciprocating that love, but I'm going to do it out of worship. It's going to cost me, even though I don't feel like it. I'm going to do it. Those things, let's ask ourselves those questions, because that's actually going to move us forward from being just a believer to a builder, and it will impact the people around us.
And as always, do your ABCs. What have you become aware of as a result of this conversation? Maybe it was just the fact that you shouldn't buy practical gifts. although I might say that I think I may have answered my own question, because if cleaning your house is worship, then I'm buying an instrument of worship for Leanne for Christmas. There we go. I've got something out of this session.
Well done.
B, what is the barrier that you need to overcome? What is it that's stopping you bringing that costly worship? What is it that's stopping you developing this lifestyle, daily choices of doing the ordinary in extraordinary ways as worship to God? And C, what are you going to change? This is all useless if it's just talk. It needs to be action. So what are you going to change as a result? Well, Go and take that into your circles. It's been a good conversation. We had a few technical hitches, but ultimately...
Clearly, I need you after all. I am not self-sufficient. I am in need of you.
You are in need of me. No, you've done a great job. So listen, remember, today and every day, you are a champion, and there's more in you than you think. Till next time, take care.
Bye.